Shadwell, so continuing the East London theme, but a little bit closer to the city, as you can see from this picture right here. So the subject of this talk are the ongoing excavations at Shadwell, focusing on the 2024-2025 seasons, which I covered. This is part of the commercial redevelopment of this area to construct a new big yellow storage unit, as well as, of course, apartments and a nighttime cultural venue. So you could spend the nights there in future. But this is only phase one of the redevelopment. Phase two, which is going to be next door, is expected in the coming years. So potentially I might be back with a proper update and quite literally filling in the gaps. So here's a few of the upcoming highlights you can expect today. In effect, you're going to get two presentations because we've basically got two sites, although geographically located in the same place, but separated temporarily by about a millennia. So we've got the late Roman settlement at Shadwell, and then we've got the post-medieval development of London's East End. In terms of the Roman phase, this is an area that has been the subject of over 50 years of excavations within the area. So our results will be impacting our current understanding of Shadwell in the late Roman period. Our findings increase the known extent of the settlement that was here, but it also opens up huge questions about its appearance and character in the final years of Roman rule. Going forward to the post-medieval period, we'll be looking at various evidence for domestic occupation, as well as small-scale craft industries, as well as global connections. And we'll particularly be focusing on the Georgian period. Here we have a George III coin on the screen here, which produced some of the richest array of artifacts, as well as structural remains and other features. And finally, we're reflecting on the archaeological findings in the context of our historical understanding of the area, which culminates in a story of bloody murder. So there's all that to look forward to. So in terms of the site location, we are just south of the highway, which is like the main road leading from Tower Bridge out towards Limehouse. So we are in between the areas of Shadwell and Wapping. So about 1 kilometres east of Londinium and, of course, the later medieval city of London. As I said, there's been over 50 years of archaeological work in the vicinity, all of it to the south of the highway. So the earliest excavations were the LD 74-76 digs, which were led by Tony Johnson of London and Middlesex Archaeological Society. That was in 1974, and then later the Inner London Archaeological Unit in 74 and 76. PCA, my company, has done quite a lot of work here as well, particularly led by my colleague Alistair Douglas. So he led the Babe Ruth and Tobacco Dock sites, which is the HGA02 and the TOC02 sites. That was in 2003 and 2002, and as well as the site next door, Tobacco Docks, in 2010, 2011. So our results will be feeding up very much into that. The geology and topography of the site is important. The highway, so the highway, which is the road which runs to the north of the site, that follows a geological boundary, which is the edge of the gravel terraces, and this is high ground, which is above a fairly steep slope, dropping to the low-lying alluvial silts of the River Thames. And so our site is situated on that very slope, with the highway at the top, dropping down to the alluvial Wapping at the bottom. To the south of the site, there may be the presence of a channel in antiquity, and even in post-medieval times, this was still a marshy area. So it could have been that Wapping was an island. In fact, when we were excavating, we found the presence of a possible paleo channel at the south end of our site. So it may have been that during prehistoric times, the Thames might have come right up to the site's periphery. So it's certainly the Roman phase. You've got to think of it as almost like a foreshore sort of site. And in fact, we did get some residual Mesolithic, Neolithic, and Bronze Age struck flints, although these were probably just washed off the gravel terraces. So the Roman archaeologist Shadwell has been the subject of a matter of debate since the 70s when this masonry structure was discovered. This is about 9 meters square externally, with walls about 1.9 meters thick. And it was uncovered in 74 and was originally interpreted as the footings of a watchtower that was later robbed out. And this and other artifactual evidence led a lot of people to interpret this Shadwell as a military site. There's since been a lot of reappraisal, and while the military argument is still there for some people, because a lot of people will argue that that this tower is situated on top of a slope, therefore with a good view of the Thames. However, David Larkin in 2022 did a reappraisal saying that this is actually a lot smaller than comparable Roman watchtowers. 9 meters isn't that big. Also, it seems to lack associated defensive earthworks. And later on in 2011, James Gerard did a paper in the light of the other excavations on the site, which noted how the visibility was actually quite poor. And this will be much clearer in the next slide. So also, we're only 1 kilometre out, so it seems almost nonsensical to have a watchtower so close to the city when somewhere like Greenwich would have had much greater visibility of London. So the military argument is a bit up in the air. What could this be, if not a watchtower? There has been suggestions that this could be a mausoleum. As you can see, there are cremation burials in the area. So it could well be that this is part of a funerary landscape occupying Shadwell in the early Roman period. The date of it's uncertain, but David Larkin argued that the the 3rd century boundary ditch, as you can see in the plan at the bottom of the picture, seems to respect the tower as well as other features. Therefore, it is possible that this is earlier than the 3rd century, and therefore placing it in the first couple of centuries of the Roman occupation. So during the first couple of centuries, this seems to have occupied a fairly liminal place. There is a weird anomaly in that there seems to be a road running towards the site, and this road was uncovered in the Eastern Cemetery. You can see it dashed out on the plan heading towards Shadwell. But unlike the road to London and Colchester, it doesn't go anywhere. It just goes to the riverside. Maybe it connected it to some sort of like riverside dock. It's all a bit unexplained at the moment. However, I think the presence of a possible mausoleum, as well as the connection with the Eastern Cemetery, further encourages the idea that this early Roman phase is more part of a liminal funerary landscape rather than a place where people necessarily lived. All that changed in the 3rd century, and this is the pattern that we picked up in our site, as with all the other previous sites, is that in terms of activity, artifacts, everything seemed to pick up in the mid 3rd century. So the bulk of archaeological remains at Shadwell are those of an occupied settlement, including boundary ditches and the layouts of various buildings. As I said, the dating evidence site really picks up in the mid 3rd century and continues throughout the 4th century and into the early 5th. And by far the most substantial archaeological remains are those you can see on the screen. This is the remains of a bathhouse, of course, which was excavated by PCA, led by my colleague Al Douglas in 2022 and 2023. So there's something unusual about the bathhouse in relation to the settlement. It's larger than your normal private baths, but it also seems to be smaller than your full public complex. obviously, it is outside the city. It has an excessive amount of hot rooms. What's also very weird is it seems to be constructed at the start of the occupation period. There doesn't seem to have been a kind of an earlier phase of occupation. This building seems to have been built, planted on virgin territory, and then it was maintained throughout its lifetime. So there's a bit of a debate about the character of Roman Shadwell. Obviously, we've got the bathhouse here. We have the remains of the possible mausoleum. We also have lots of ditches and buildings going on. Um, the late Roman period is known to be a time of emerging settlement patterns, broadly reflecting economic transformations and political upheaval throughout the empire and beyond. This was a time when the empire was literally fragmenting and reassembling and fragmenting again, this being the crisis of the third century, and of course, the final centuries leading up to the fall of the western half of the empire. Um, the third century was a time of decline for long distance trades, and it seems to have been replaced, or rather, people seem to have been more in favour of more regional networks. So you get a lot more new settlements popping up with more reliance on more locally sourced goods. And for these networks to be self-sustaining, old trading hubs seem to have had a greater reliance on the broader rural hinterland, giving rise to these new economic modes, including the rise of villas as economic entities. As for how this impacted Londinium, there seems to have been a decline in Londinium as a trading hub and industrial centre from the late second century onwards, although it may have re-emerged as a more administrative ceremonial capital. Trade and manufacturing appears to have been devolved into the wider Thames Valley and southeast regions. So how does this impact Shadwell? Because the problem with Shadwell is it's so close to Londinium. It's doesn't really make sense as a kind of one of these sort of economic nodes. Also, there's very little evidence of sustained trade and industries going on here. And the assemblage of the recent excavations clearly shows emphasis on domestic wares and a lack of transportation vessels such as flagons and amphora. Again, as I said, the proximity to Londinium makes it unlike anywhere else. Although it seems to be a nucleated settlement, it seems to lack the normal functions of a late Roman town. So, what are the origins of this settlement? A lot of discussion has been had about the presence of East Gaulish ware. This was something that was found a lot of in proximity to the possible mausoleum and also throughout the previous excavations. Less so in our area, but I'll come back to that later. So this is specifically the East Gaulish ware was seen as a core element for the military argument, given its past associations with Roman towns and forts. However, Joanna Bird has argued that Shadwell assemblage was part of a single shipment, dating very much to the mid third century, and also given there was almost total absence of Central Gaulish ware, we're very much focused on East Gaulish ware, suggests a sort of a direct transplantation. Furthermore, the East Gaulish ware seems to be primarily associated with the earliest phase of occupation, that dating to the mid-3rd century. So as a result, some have argued that the original population may have been migrants from the Rhineland. This is a time when the Rhineland was a particularly unstable frontier in the Roman Empire. So it could be that during the height of the 3rd century crisis, people from this area may have actually transported themselves over to Shadwell or were brought over by some sort of authority. Either way, it does seem that Shadwell was some sort of planted or planned town. And central to this appears to be the bathhouse. As I said, it's unusual for it being constructed at the start of the settlement and also at such a great size. For over a century, it was clearly expanded and modified, despite being flooded on at least one occasion. And there's also evidence of high status food consumption within the bathhouse complex. We're talking figs, wine, polychrome grass. And whereas to the east, to the west of the site, where it's a bit more domestic, you seem to have more evidence of domestic settlement. So it could be that this was a settlement that was set up to serve the bathhouse complex. So it could well be that this may have been some sort of almost spa resort for visitors to Londinium coming up the Thames. This is all kind of in the ether. This is all part kind of the discussions that are happening at the moment. So let's bring in my excavations finally. I'll stop talking about other people's work now. We are 150 meters west of the 2010 excavations, so about a quarter of a kilometre away from the bathhouse. As I said, this is the first of two halves of the redevelopment. We very much focus on the western half. The eastern half will eventually be demolished and new buildings constructed there, and hopefully we'll get the chance to do the archaeology there as well. So after a period of initial trial trenches, we then came back and did an evaluation here in 2024. Unfortunately, the result of this evaluation showed that a lot of the site was heavily truncated. What was here before was a garage, which had a kind of a step into the slope. So as you can see from the plan, from the cross section at the top, basically the entire middle of the site was taken out by this step and even went down to the London clay in some cases. However, we did find that the areas to the north of the site, so the top of the slope, and the south end of the site, so the bottom of the slope, were largely intact and did have archaeological survival. And so we went back and did two excavations, the south area and then the north area. So just like in the other sites, the archaeology seems to pick up in the 3rd century. I think the pottery dates are primarily late 3rd century onwards, and also we don't seem to have any of the famed East Gaulish ware, which was so important to the early discussions. So as I said, the East Gaulish ware seems to be part of that original import, potentially from these Rhineland migrations. So the fact that we don't seem to have this here suggests that for the first few decades of the site to the east, this seems to have been a bit more in the periphery. So this part of the site may have been occupied maybe a generation or two later. At first, it seems quite ephemeral, although we've got evidence of potentially a metal surface you can see on the floor here, and also some shallower pits which may have had a structural purpose, potentially some sort of sunken featured building. There was daub found in this pit, which is, I'm not entirely making up that it might be a building. There is evidence of that there. But anyway, it does seem to be fairly ephemeral, suggesting this site was very much on the limits until the start of the 4th century. To the south of the site, we have evidence of terracing. So it could have been that this area was agricultural. Also, remember this part of the site would have been marshy and potentially even close to a possible river channel separating the mainland from Wapping. So it could have been that the terracing was necessary in order to keep parts of the slope dry for pasture or agriculture of sorts. Again, we have primarily domestic pottery sourced from southern Britain, particularly Oxfordshire, Surrey, and Kent. Remember what I said about late Roman settlements being very much part of a regional area, so it makes sense that these things largely come from the Thames Valley. In the alluvium that filled this terracing, we had a variety of finds, including this rather nice copper alloy handle, which I'm assured has an animal head to it. And actually, you can see, if you look carefully, sort of the incised carvings of antlers, which makes our experts think this might be a deer. So this is from a jug or a ewer or water jug. We also had a lot of animal bone here. It's generally suggestive of routine food preparation and consumption, mainly cattle, with some poultry, game, and fish. So generally, sort of quite typical domestic living. Um, there was no particular evidence of butchery, so it is potential that the meat might have been imported, which again, as I said, there's not really much evidence of kind of industries happening in Shadwell, which again suggests that things might have been imported and then the settlement used to sustain the spa complex, as it were, at the bathhouse. Um, there's a bit more intense activity in the mid fourth century. So particularly in the north area of the site, we have quite a nice cluster of pits and gullies and a couple of post holes and all the rest of it. Um, the We also have some consolidation layers for the ground, evidence of sustained activity. Um, it may be there might have been a building here that's largely based on the density of the pits, which suggests they might be concentrated around something. And indeed, some of these cuts are quite sharp, so may well have had structural foundations, but I need a bit more work to try and tidy this up. Either way, it's definitely evidence that the settlement by the mid fourth century was expanding beyond its core to the east, but near the bathhouse. By this time, the mid fourth century, we seem to very much be within the settlement itself. However, the all this changed again in the late fourth century. So now we're now into the final decades of the Roman occupation, and the main thing that is represented that represents this on this site is this rather enormous ditch. Um, Now, we only did a few slots through this, but you can sort of see this quite nice profile in the section. And if you look at the overall site shot on the left-hand side of the picture, and this is off the north area, so we're looking directly eastwards along the northern LOE of the site. And I assure you that that ditch continues right the way through, basically cutting through the entire northern LOE of the site. And also, what you can see in the picture is not even all of it. It was so big that the northern boundary lies beyond the LOE, so we actually didn't have the full profile of it. So it is quite substantial, probably about 1.5 meters deep, which doesn't seem particularly deep, although it may have been. Remember, that we're on the slope, so it may have been higher on the northern, so the ground may be higher to the north, and therefore the slope might have been steeper on that side. However, it does definitely seem to occupy the crest of the natural slope, which is later followed by the highway. As you can see, it's made. You've got one main ditch, which is probably up to about 5 meters wide, including the bit we have next to the north, plus a smaller parallel ditch. So in total, looking at something at least 7 meters wide. Now, we actually did manage to excavate the base of this ditch, because when actually, it was the first trench that I personally dug on this site, was the evaluation trench, which went directly down the middle of it. And I was plowing through all these alluvial layers, and I think when am I going to get to the gravels? And eventually, I got to the bottom of the gravels, and it turned out after all that that I was in the bottom of this Roman ditch. So we do have good dating for when this was constructed, and it definitely seems to be after 350 AD. So very much in the at the very end of the Roman period. Also, it doesn't seem to be truncated by any other Roman features on this site. This seems to be one of, if not the last feature dug on the site. As I said, it's filled very much with alluvial and slumped gravels, which is part of the natural earth, which suggests that it was abandoned to fill up naturally at the end of the Roman period over the course of the early Middle Ages. The function is unclear. However, I think this clearly represents a major kind of reorganization of the site in the late 4th century. If you think about this in context, there's already been it's already been recognised that there has been quite a lot of examples of settlement transfiguration on this site taking place in the late 4th century. Namely, it seems the mausoleum was demolished in the late 4th century. Crucially, also the bathhouse seems to have been both abandoned and stripped of scrap materials such as metal in the late 4th century. So deliberately demolished and materials taken for reuse. However, the site did continue even after the demolition of these earlier monuments. If you can see the plan there, you can see several new buildings being constructed, and some other rooms been subdivided. So we still get structures with multi rooms made out of stone being built in the late 4th century in Shadwell, even after the bathhouse is demolished. Also, you get new boundary ditches as well. So let me just pick up my notes. So during the recent excavations, there were quite large quantities of building material found in the double ditch. So this kind of links us to this phase of demolition and rebuilding, which seems to be taking place across the wider site. We have as well flutile and also some high quality stone as well, which does suggest that some of this high quality material from the bathhouse was being taken to this part of the site. What is it used for? It's unclear. As I said, we haven't got the full profile of it. Although it does seem to be some sort of boundary to something. Could it be defensive? Well, as I said, it's on the high ground. 1.5 meters deep isn't too big, so it's unlikely to be effective. There's no evidence of a palisade as it such. However, given that it occupies the crest of the slope, it certainly would have been visually imposing. So I think it's very likely that this could have marked some sort of high status property, potentially maybe even a villa or something. But clearly, this is part of the wider transformation, reorganization of Shadwell in the late 4th century, which lasted for a few decades before the final abandonment at the end of the Roman period. So at this point, we obviously have a long pause of over a millennia. The ditch was gradually silted, but we did have a few finds which do give some tantalizing evidence of near continuity in the area. Of course, we got the Roman coins from this site, clearly washed in from the activity nearby. We also got this lovely possible Anglo-Saxon pin beater. As this is a bone tool used for sort of weaving wool or some sort of knitting. So this is normally associated with the early Saxon period. It could be late Roman potentially. The jury's out on this one. But what's also quite intriguing is that right at the very top of the ditch sequence, we did get this rather strange cluster of Roman material right at the top of the ditch sequence. So after it would have been silted up. So that does suggest that there does seem to have been Roman masonry upstanding on the site in the vicinity, even after the area was abandoned. So potential for ruins. And obviously we can potentially go into how this may have both attracted early Anglo-Saxons for materials, could also, just like with the ruins of the city of London, this could have maybe discouraged settlement from these previous ghostly areas. But all this we won't really know until we dig the site to the north, so we can really see what this late enclosure was about and if there was any sort of continuity into the early medieval period. So let's fast forward 1,000 years. We're going to skip over the High Middle Ages, where London obviously re-emerged as an important European city. This is a woodcut showing the east end of London, so you can sort of see the tower in the foreground, and at the top you have basically Whitechapel High Street leading out of Aldgate, and all the houses built across there. Despite its proximity, the site probably appears to be an open land, probably with fields to the north and pastureland to the south throughout this period. We don't really have any late medieval coinage here, and it's possible the highway itself wasn't laid out until the 16th or 17th century. Some of the later maps clearly show that the highway was a minor road compared to places like Whitechapel High Street. But I think it seems to be that once you've got the docks developing along Wapping, and then it would have been impractical to go all the way around that loop. So it seems that at some point the highway was constructed as a literal shortcut, literally the highway on the slope over the pastureland to connect the docks at Shadwell back to St Catherine's. Some of the earliest pottery of the site dates to around the late 16th century, although I think we can probably be fairly certain that there was stuff going on here, certainly from the early 17th century onwards. We did have evidence of some structures. In the top right-hand corner, you can see a line of post holes and also some 2 stone post pads, which probably held timber uprights to support a structure. This is probably one of the earliest structures that we had. It's worth noting that the actual trench was set back a little bit from the road, so we don't necessarily have the oldest street fronts available. Rather, we mainly have the backyards, but clearly we do have some of the some of the rear buildings poking out into our area. And also some of the earliest brick buildings we can see here in the bottom right-hand corner. So the most significant artifactual assemblage came from the 17th century, and this was largely due to a number of deep pits on the site. These are fairly regular. We've got rounded ones, we've got squarish ones. This one in the middle here may have been some sort of woodline tank. There is a lot of evidence of ivory working coming from these things. So you can see a few examples in the top right of the screen here of ivory. And this obviously shows the earliest signs of exotic raw materials being imported from abroad, and similar evidence of ivory working has been found on Tower Hill up the road. Let's get back a bit. A lot of these pits seem to have been backfilled in the 17th century, which may suggest a phase of rebuilding potentially. We know the Civil War defences ran through this site, so it could have been the buildings were cleared for that. I think it's more likely that in the wake of the Great Fire of London, even outside the city, there seemed to be a bit more of an effort to convert old timber buildings into brick. And so some of the older things may have been actively cleared into these deep pits for new brick edifices to be constructed along the highway. So as well as evidence of ivory working, we have other evidence of potential domestic industries happening here. For example, we've got this horse, which was buried in the back garden of one of our properties. Unfortunately, it's not very well preserved. It's no particular evidence of butchery. It seems to be buried with care, and obviously one horse doesn't make a knacker's yard. So I think it's more likely this was probably a working pony which had some sort of use, probably for carrying goods around in the yard for whoever owned it. Of course, we also have evidence of domestic use, particularly animal bone pottery, but also things like this thimble that we see on the screen here. We, of course, also get masses and massive of clay tobacco pipe, which firmly embed this within a culture of artisans and labourers. At the time, this being the 17th century, it seems clay tobacco pipe smoking seems to have been gone out of fashion with the upper classes. However, it was very much still prevalent among the working classes. However, there is some evidence of affluence. We've got tin glazed wall tiles on this site, as well as a turkey bone. So clearly, someone was having a classic Christmas dinner. So although we are looking at a working class area, it does seem to have been one of some uh, aspiring quality. So the big major change to the site, in terms of the visual of archaeology, is the construction of a load of brick structures. This seems to have been part of a redevelopment that happened in the 1780s. So we not only did we have structures built along the highway side, we also have structures built along the Pennington Street side to the south of the site. This would have coincided with roughly with the construction of the London Dock, which would have basically drained the pass down to the south and therefore made the wider area habitable. And this is when you get a lot of the streets being constructed around the time. As I said, the trenches is actually off the street front. So what we probably are looking at are the extensions of earlier properties, rather than the fronts of the properties themselves. This is certainly the case on the highway side. So these structures continued into the 19th century. So you can see on the left, you've got a late 18th century map, and you got on the right, you got a late 19th century map, and clearly you can see urban expansion is in full swing here. You've got lots of buildings, you've got industrial buildings being built to fill the space within the lines of property. Also within the site itself, we've got evidence for a number of phases of adaptation. We have floors being built, fireplaces being built. This is especially the case on the highway side. So the highway would have been the main street, whereas Pennington Street to the south would have been a bit more out the way. So you can clearly see a difference between the properties at the top of the slope facing the high street, which seems to have the money for more repairs, more extensions, more things like fireplaces to be added, compared to the south, which seems to have been largely static domestic dwellings. Of course, one of the reasons why the extensions have happened at the top was because these, as well as being domestic areas, these were also shop fronts. And it could well have been that the original extensions of these properties was to accommodate the shop fronts as well as a domestic space. In terms of the character of Georgian and Victorian Shadwell, so as you can see, we have the dwellings to the south, but also, as I said, the shop fronts to the north. We have public houses on the corners, and I like to think that something like this domino was part of that sort of leisure atmosphere. But also we have evidence of individual identities popping up. So, for example, we have this rather nice Celtic harp, which is part of some sort of badge or brooch. So, again, 19th century, this is a time with new ideas were emerging, evidence of nationalism coming up, which obviously will spill over into the 20th century. So already these kind of symbols are emerging, and this Irish harp is one of them, and there will be another one a little bit later on if I have time. Yeah, I'll just put this slide up in terms of going back to the whole kind of like obviously, by the time we get to the mid 19th century, this part of London has a bit of a disputable character. Highlighted some of the words here: dirty, disorderly, debased, detestable place. But what really comes out of these quotes as well is just how international it is as well. Gold Coast, Malay, Arctic, Pacific, Americans, Russians, Chinese, Portuguese, Spaniards, Italians, Greeks. This seems to be kind of more. So clearly, we've seen a very multicultural sort of atmosphere going on here. I also put this, if you have time just to read through this quote by Montague Williams on the bottom side of the page. It describes a moment where basically this sort of upper class gent goes out to kind of almost inspect these East End areas, and him and his friends hired a couple of policemen to help them get through there safely. But I do like, if you get to the bottom, they seem he sort of chucks in that the police actually seem to be getting on quite well with the curious individuals they were meeting, and of his friends, they and of my friends and myself, no notice whatever was taken. So I do wonder if some of it may be a little bit about class attitudes rather than actual reality itself. In terms of more international collections, we have this lovely French Gambier pipe, which came from the backfill of the buildings after they were demolished in the 19th century. And it was actually found by one of the digger drivers. And I think he was a bit miffed when I didn't give it back. So this is the head of a clay pipe. Unlike your usual clay pipe, this was just the head, and you'd have a wooden pipe to stick into it. And amazingly, there is this young chap, the student, does feature in a catalogue by the Gambier, which was a French pipe making company based in Paris, but also had a shop in London. So it could well be this was bought by this from the shop in Covent Garden. So again, clearly, although we are in very much the East End, clearly the people here did have some sort of taste and were going out to Covent Garden to buy some nice fancy items. I mentioned earlier about having international connections and also about emerging national identities. And probably the clearest example of this is this clay pipe we have from the Victorian period. And if you look carefully, you got to trust me. On the right hand side, you've got an emu, and on the left hand side, you've got an emu, and on the right hand side, you've got a kangaroo, and these surround a coat of arms. So obviously, emu and kangaroo. This is clearly Australian, although this was clearly made before Australia was federated. So Australia was federated in 1901, but for many, many decades prior to that, the various territories were thinking about kind of how they could coalesce into a single political entity. And there was a whole series of draft coat of arms emerging over this period. Now, my colleague Richard Ward has done a lot of work trying to work out which, trying to find an exact match of this coat of arms to somewhere else, because they're all very slightly different. And the only match it's found is from this penny token, which comes from Queensland, and it has both the emu and the kangaroo, the Advanced Australia motto, which is just about visible on our pipe, and crucially, the exact configuration of the shield in the middle with the anchor, the ship, the bushel. And if you flip it over to the other side, here we are, J. Sawyer, wholesale and retail tobacconist from Brisbane. So I think we have a match there. So we're not quite sure, obviously, if this was made here or made in Australia. But it could well be the case that the clay came from here, was brought to Australia, made into a pipe there, and then brought back here. So this could well be a very, very far travelled item indeed. Another far travelled item we have is this giant spider conch, which came from the Indian Ocean. And this seems to be associated with Jarmek's Animal Emporium, which was a shop which was known to across the road from the site. And I think it was made famous when it had an escaped tiger, which luckily didn't kill anyone, but there was a statue of the little boy who approached the tiger thinking, "Oh, hello, large kitty," and everything was fine. So there is a statue in Tobacco Dockyard now commemorating this occasion. But this was clearly a local attraction in the area, and this conch may well be an example of it. I'm just rushing through the end now because I'm yet to admit the big climax of the site, which so I've already gone over how the fact that there seems to be although by you get to the mid Victorian period, you get this area does have a bit of a reputation. The archaeology does suggest that actually it seems to definitely seem to be working class. It was increasingly multicultural and also reasonably affluent in some places as well. However, the negative connotations of this area may have been started by a series of murders, which included the Ratcliffe Highway murders. And amazingly, it seems that the one of these murders, which happened in December 1811, may have actually taken place on our very site. So this was at 29 Ratcliffe Highway. I don't have time to go through the whole story anymore because it's and also it's quite a gruesome, horrible story. So I don't won't go into any details anyway. But this happened at 29 Ratcliffe Highway, which does seem to have been one of the houses on our site. And I believe it's the one just behind. If you can see the picture of my colleagues, you see the person with the surveying rod. That's it's. I believe it's the building just behind him there. Uh, and one of the amazing things about the fact that we have this historical event, albeit a horrible one, is that we actually do have actually an illustration of one of our buildings. So this is 29 Ratcliffe Highway, which I believe is one of our buildings, as it looked in 1811. We also have this picture of the street from. This is from the family's funeral. Because unfortunately, the entire family was wiped out in the murders. And this was a very, very shocking occasion. And it wasn't the only one. There was another killing in the pub just up the road. A man was caught for the murder, and a crowd of, they believe, 18. Yeah, some records show that when they hanged the murderer and then they buried the murderer in a very pagan sort of style, it is believed that a crowd of 180,000 people attended this occasion. So this was a really, really, really massive public occasion. And the fact that this outpouring happened as a result of the deaths of this family does go to show that this wasn't commonplace. It was a genuinely shocking event. The family that was killed was clearly upwardly mobile. They just bought their own shop, and this was not a done deal. This is not a normal thing to happen. So the fact that you get nearly 200,000 people coming out to essentially desecrate the body of the man who did this shows that this was clearly a shocking event in the context of what would have been actually a fairly nice street. And here we even have a picture of said street in the late Victorian times, potentially with bird cages from one of these exotic shops selling parrots and such like. So last slide. This just shows to show obviously this lovely picture of a very nice terraced house street is no longer the case there. This is the reason for it. Bombing in World War II. Our site itself, the area had already been cleared for a new housing estate. But as you can see, we're right by the tobacco docks. Therefore, it's completely unsurprising that pretty much this entire street was essentially blasted. And as a result, it does look very, very different today. So that's about it, really. So overall, importance and significance. Going back to the Roman period, this site has significantly contributed to our understanding of the development of Shadwell throughout time, complementing a substantial body of previous archaeological work. It's enhanced our understanding of late Roman Shadwell, demonstrating occupation extended beyond the broader area than had previously been established. The identification and investigation of the late 4th century double ditch does have wider implications on the perspective of the late 4th century organisation of the area, and this could in turn feed into the wider story of the decline of Roman authority in the London area and potentially even the emergence of Anglo-Saxon society. We also have the site also gives us an important contribution to our understanding of post-medieval Shadwell. I rushed through the artifact assemblage a bit there, but it does provide valuable evidence for various aspects of daily life, craft production, economic activity, and global connections. There may be particular public interest in the Ratcliffe Highway murders, given that they happened on this site. However, the archaeology gives us the opportunity to place the story in the context of the site itself, and potentially challenging the prejudices that we attach to the area and showing that actually may not have been as bad a place after all. Thank you very much.